Good morning, everybody. My name is Jacob Stapleton-Reinhold, and today my project is the analysis of volunteers who deliver water bottles to the Flint community. Before I get started, I just want to give you guys a little background of the project and the city. So the city is Flint with a population of just under 100,000. Back in 2014, Flint changed its water source from the treated Detroit Water and Sewage Department to the Flint River. Since then, there have been lead contamination of the water because of the corrosive water from the river, and this has caused lead from the old pipes to mix in with the water. Volunteers are asked to help distribute water bottles to the households affected since they have been told not to drink the city water supply. And to the right is a picture of typical water conditions in Flint. The aims of this project will look mainly at the process of loading the water bottles into a truck before the actual distribution of the product. I will use MODAPs to create a standard time to measure the transfer of water bottles from the pallet to the vehicle truck and compare them with the observed time of volunteers. I used 3D SSPP to examine the posture of volunteers bending down to pick up the bottom row of water bottles from the crate. And I will perform fatigue analysis on different parts of the body used in the process. So just a little overview on the MODAPs. MODAPs was conducted with 2 volunteers. These volunteers would grab a case of water from a pallet and put them in the back of a truck. Some assumptions I made while doing my analysis were that it was an average male volunteer. There were 72 cases of water per pallet. The cases fit on the pallet 3 by 4, stacked 6 rows high, totaling 5 feet. A volunteer walks 5 meters from the pallet to the back of the truck. A case of water weighs 30 pounds, and volunteers carry 1 case at a time. On the right of this chart, this graph, or this chart, is the observed time with 2 workers. As you can see, basically the time increases as you get to the bottom row, with the first row or the bottom row being the most with 69.8 seconds. And then using MODAPs, I was able to cut roughly 10 seconds per row in the process. My recommendations from MODAPs was having the volunteers pull the cases of water towards the end of the pallet instead of walking around the pallet to get the cases that are in the back. This would save about a second or two of walking time. And then I also would recommend to park the truck closer to the pallets to minimize walking distance. This would eliminate some of that non-value added time. I conducted a 3D SSPP analysis on a typical condition in which volunteers grabbed a case from the bottom pallet and compared it with another way in which volunteers can grab the same cases. I conducted fatigue analysis on the upper limbs involved in the process and simulated exhaustion time of a volunteer when he or she grabs the case and starts walking with it. The typical observed position was pretty much just kind of like a bending down and picking up the case. As you can see, the compression force was 926 pounds, and the strength capability percentages were lower on the torso and the hip area. When using a crouch position, the L4 L5 compression decreased to 732 pounds, and the strength capability percentages increased in the torso and in the hip. My recommendations would be that when volunteers check in, that they fill out a section where they would explain their past medical history. If they had previous injuries, then maybe the volunteers would be suited elsewhere in the process, such as data entry, a food bank, driving instead of lifting, things like that. I would also have a brief training session where the coordinator of the volunteers would explain to those who are distributing water bottles to trucks from pallets about the different ways of picking up the cases and how it may hurt your back. I performed a quick grip fatigue analysis because some volunteers gripped the plastic casing instead of the bottom of the water bottles. And um, for a male volunteer, the typical time to exhaustion is 190 seconds, and the female volunteer, the typical time to exhaustion is 53.2 seconds. This is just a brief overview of my recommendations. Obviously, pull cases towards the ends of the pallets instead of walking around. Parking truck closer to the pallet to minimize walking distance. Have volunteers indicate whether they have had previous injuries. Go over proper ways of picking up cases from the bottom of the pallet. Resting volunteers after each pallet to reduce risk of injury. And tell volunteers to hold the bottom of the case instead of gripping the outside plastic to avoid potential exhaustion. And are there any questions at this time?